So, good evening, everybody. I'm really delighted to see you all. Thank you so much for making the time to be here this evening. I'm Liz Ellis. I'm Curator of Community Learning here at Tate Modern. And looking around the room, I'm really delighted to see so many friends, colleagues, allies, neighbours, artists, health workers. Really great crowd. Thank you for making the time to be here. We're really proud to be hosting the launch of the wonderful LARF London Arts and Health Forum Creativity and Wellbeing Week. And as some of you know, this is the second year that we've had a launch lecture. And my colleague Damien Hebron will be telling you a little bit more about the structure of the evening in a minute. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about the context of arts and health here at Tate Modern, because the building's been open since 2000, and in that time, the range of collaborations between arts and health organisations across London and nationally has been really important to all of us at Tate Modern, and thank you for contributing so much to that over the years. As I look round the room, there are so many practitioners represented here, and I know in the coming week there's so much activity. So, for example, the King's Fund, the Health Policy Think Tank, the range of NHS trusts, Cooltan, Portugal Prints, Seymour Arts, the range of artists and arts organisations who are part of this week and have also been part of collaborations with community learning over the last 13 years is really significant. So it's very important to us at Tate that we are working together with the London Arts and Health Forum to host this launch event. And I'm now going to pass to my colleague, as I say, Damien Hebron, who will tell you a little bit more about the structure of the evening and our wonderful guest. Thank you.
Thank you. As Liz said, I'm Damien. I'm the Director of London Arts and Health Forum, and I'm very pleased to welcome you all here. This is the launch event for London Creativity and Wellbeing Week, and it's great to be back at Tate Modern for that. This year there's over 70 events in the week, and they reflect a real diversity of the work that goes on all the time, all year round, in bringing together arts, creativity, health and wellbeing. The idea of the week is that it shines a light on this work, brings people together and helps us all to think a bit about the work that we do in this area and to think about why we do it and to look at where this work sits in the world today. So it's really appropriate that we should start with somebody who can kind of spark off all that thinking, and so I'm very pleased that Bonnie Greer is giving this opening lecture. In a moment I'm going to introduce Bonnie, and she's going to talk for a bit, and she promises me that the talk is designed to provoke thinking in you all, so it's not just a one-sided thing. You guys have got to participate too, so there's going to be an opportunity for questions and a bit of a kind of discussion once Bonnie's spoken, so we'll be throwing that over to you, and I hope that you'll have some comments, thoughts and ideas that you want to throw back at Bonnie and Liz and I. I should tell you that the evening's being audio recorded. So if you do, when you do ask questions at the end, if you could introduce yourself and as you ask the question, and there's also photographs being taken through the evening. Then once that's done, we hope that you'll all be able to come and join us for a cup of tea and a biscuit afterwards and kind of carry on conversations. So I'm going to introduce Bonnie. Bonnie is, and I'm not even going to apologise for the fact I'm going to have written this all down because she's done lots, so I don't want to miss stuff out. So Bonnie is an award-winning playwright and critic who was born and raised in Chicago and moved to London in the 1980s. She has written novels, biographies, autobiography, plays, radio plays, TV miniseries, opera, commentary and criticism. She's presented documentaries about the arts and regularly appears on TV and radio to discuss culture and politics. She served for 8 years as a trustee of the British Museum, and she's currently serving on the board of the Serpentine Gallery. She was appointed an OBE in 2010 and has recently been named as the new Chancellor of Kingston University. She has reflected often on the perspective that these different experiences have provided. In her book, Obama Music, about the role Chicago played in her life and in the life of President Obama, she talks about life as an expat here in Britain as giving her an analogue edge, saying, "Sometimes you can see bigger shapes, deeper patterns. We're really pleased that Bonnie is giving this opening lecture, and I'm sure that she will provide that analogue edge and help us to discern some bigger shapes and deeper patterns. So, welcome, Bonnie.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Damien. Thank you all for coming tonight. This isn't going to be a lecture because I can't lecture to any of you. So this is just going to be some thoughts, and hopefully we can engage with these thoughts and talk about them. I like to start with a little bit of something about me that I've not ever talked about in public before. But, there's a time when you get old enough and it's time to do it. And so I want to tell you this little story. About when I started university, which was a long time ago, my early 20s, I got a call. I mean, in America, you don't have grants or anything, so I was at work at night to pay for my tuition, and just trying to keep it all together. And I got a call that my best friend was missing. Now, I'm the oldest of 7 children, and pretty much what they used to call a house child. I was in the house. I didn't have any friends, really. I helped my mother. I read my books. I kept pretty much to myself. My sisters and brothers were much more extroverts than me, but I wasn't really at all. I was what they used to call an egghead and a bookworm and all these kind of things. And so my best friend was really my best friend. She knew everything about me, and she knew me. And we had drifted apart a little bit because I went to university and she got married. But she was still the one person closest to me. So I got this phone call that she was missing. And, when you first get a call like that, you think, well, she's just out with somebody or whatever. And then a week passed and they couldn't find her. She still hadn't turned up. And, if you're a poor black woman, working class black woman anywhere, but especially in Chicago, you're not going to get no all points bulletin out looking for you. You're gone. You're missing. You're just gone. That I can't explain what it's like when somebody you love goes missing. I don't know if any of you have experienced that, but it's a very strange condition because you don't have a body. You don't have anything. I mean, people die, we make closure rituals. We make things that heal us, basically. And when you don't have this person, you can't do that. And I realized, I think, a couple of years later that I was off the rails. And I didn't know that until, you start doing weird stuff. I was doing weird little tiny things. I realized I was in mourning. And I was trying to deal with this. I was trying to cope with this. And I couldn't cope with it. I was losing it. And then one day I came home to my mom's house and something happened. And at the end of this, I'm going to tell you what it was because it's germane to this talk. I've been looking around for the definition of well-being, looking for just what it is. And so in my search for that, I found these terms. Well-being, a positive outcome that is meaningful for people and for many sectors of society as well. People have to see and feel that their lives are going well. Well-being is also what people think and also what they feel about their lives, such as the quality of their relationships, their positive emotions, their resilience, and the possibility of the realization of their human potential, along with their overall satisfaction with life. That's one of the definitions of well-being. Another definition of well-being is a kind of measure. It's a valid population outcome measure that's beyond morbidity, mortality, and economic status, that tells us how people perceive their life is going from their own perspective. And well-being is also associated with other realities like self-perceived health, longevity, healthy behaviors, mental and physical illness, social connectedness, productivity, factors in the physical and the social environment. So let's take positive emotions as a central component of well-being. And I know that for some of you, the word positive emotions sounds a little bit like something Beyonce would be singing, but let me spell this out a bit. First of all, positive emotion, I've learned, is not just the opposite of negative emotion. Positive emotion is a measurable dimension. In other words, we can actually see its effects. It is a dimension in which your job, your family, your health, and your economic environment are as you want them to be, also as you imagine them to be, also as you think that you deserve them to be, based on your qualifications, your hard work, your mental and emotional capacity. Positive emotion is a dimension in which you feel that you are understood and you are appreciated and you can function. You can make a contribution. So well-being has to encompass positive emotions, and these have been measured in various health studies, and they've also been shown in these various health studies to decrease the risk of illness, of injury, and recovery is faster. These studies also show that the human immune system functions better with positive emotions. So positive emotions keep us healthy and they keep us happy. So let's just look for a moment at the conclusions of the 2010 Marmot Report. In November 2008, Professor Sir Michael Marmot was asked by the then Secretary of State for Health to chair an independent review to propose the most effective evidence-based strategies for reducing health inequalities in England. The final report, Fair Society, Healthy Lives, was published in February 2010 and concluded that reducing health inequalities would require action on 6 policy objectives. And I know you know these, but let me go over these again. Give every child the best start in life. 2, enable all children, young people, and adults to maximize their capabilities and have control over their lives. 3, create fair employment and good culture and good work for all. I almost said the word that wasn't even there. 4, ensure healthy standard of living for all. 5, create and develop healthy and sustainable places and communities. And 6, strengthen the role and impact of ill health prevention. Now, these are all extremely important, but you may have noticed that culture isn't mentioned. And I think that's because even then, and I think even more now, our politicians don't rate it. Very few of them rate culture. I'm telling you, I know this from personal experience. We are in an age where many of them, especially the young ones, are what I call professional politicians. By that I mean they go straight from an Oxbridge PPS, then they get a job as a researcher for an MP, then they maybe take a little bit of time out for a small job in the media or in the city, but still stay in that little loop. Then after they finish that, they go back again and become special advisors. Then when they've deemed to have that really down, they're offered a safe seat. Then they become a minister. Then they become a Secretary of State. And all the while aiming for party leader, because that's how you get to the top, the keys to number 10. And I also know that that is really what a lot of politicians are aiming for, the top, because they think that once they get there, they can make the changes that they want, and art and culture doesn't help them get that way. For many of them, culture is a pastime or something you indulge in when you go to your constituency. Culture is the domain of the Ministry of Fun. Way out there and way up there, and it ain't serious. Because culture keeps the people happy and keeps them quiet and keeps them voting like you want. We're in a time now, whether you have the expertise or not, you're going to be on a board because you can raise money. It's going very much like in this country, like American boards. When I was sitting on the British Museum, I just finished my 8 years tenure there, which of course is impossible in America because being on a board is about having money. And when I would tell people that I was deputy chair of the British Museum, the first thing they say to me was not, "Oh, that's fantastic, congratulations." They say, "I know you were rich," because you have to be. But we're going that way now. And I know people think that this is an exaggeration. But people are being asked now if they're fundraisers and if they can raise money. So when a Peter Bazalgette can replace a Liz Forgan as head of the Arts Council, and nobody bats an eye at Whitehall because, hey, Big Brother and theater are essentially the same thing, isn't it? It's entertainment. That's what this is about. Now, that may be a bit cruel in regards to Sir Peter, but he's a big guy, and I'm sure he's heard worse directed at him. But to me, his appointment is a kind of shorthand, an example of where we are and where we're going. And let's hope that the Arts Council can continue to make a case for culture. So in the Marmot Report, almost every Whitehall department is mentioned in the list of interested parties, but not the DCMS, because art is becoming, in the UK, a commodity. So as artists, cultural practitioners, culture makers, funders, people who love culture, we're in a dangerous time. I know that we're all aware of this. I don't have to tell many of you what the state of play is, but it's worth saying this again and again. The notion of the best for the many, which helped make the UK a shining beacon, the greatest nation for theater, for example, is under threat. And unless we get that notion back into the minds of policymakers and politicians, we can't link in anything else. We can't link in health. We have to keep our national museums free at the point of entry, for example, because the very fact of free entry creates an institution which lessens elitism. The pressure of open admission ensures that boards are more reflective of the general population, that boards can look more and more like the people who come to the museum. Free admission enables a more open dialogue, a good pressure on museums to create exhibitions and collect objects that tell a story of humankind, a full story. But if we make the arts and culture a monetized thing, then we come more and more like America, where museum exhibitions are created to the taste of some rich person, philanthropist, who wants us to fund them. And because there is no public health system in the United States past the emergency room, which, by the way, whenever people tell you about a health system in the United States, there isn't really a health system in the United States. The law is if you get to the emergency room, you have to be seen. So what happens in the United States, in my state of Illinois where I was born, for instance, I have an addiction to aspirin, and a lot of working class people and poor people do, because you go to the emergency room, the person in the emergency room is, let's say, a cardiac surgeon who's on duty. So the cardiac surgeon who's billing the hospital, which is a private hospital, for her time, which is cardiac surgeon time, you come in there, you sit in the emergency room, and you're prescribed an aspirin and told to go home. But if you have a bed in this private hospital because you have an insurance policy through your job, your premium goes up because a cardiac surgeon is in the emergency room. That's the American healthcare system. And what the president has through his bill is trying to stop that. But culture is becoming in our country an extra. And for the time being, we have to make our art and do our work within this. And we have to, at the same time, keep the Arts Council and the DCMS honest. And we who have benefited and are benefiting from public subsidy in our personal work or at the institutions in which we've worked have to do our best to ensure that this culture of public subsidy for the arts, for culture, does not die. We have to become warriors, and you have to stay a warrior. So let's go back to positive emotions. In about 1983, in New York City, where I lived at the time, I began to teach Shakespeare in schools on the Lower East Side. Now, the schools in the area near the East River, I think it's all really gentrified now. I actually can't stand New York now, but back then it was known as Lower East Side in the Hispanic argot of that time, and had a largely Latino and African American student body in the school I was asked to be in. They lived in high-rise estates along the river. Most of the families were on welfare. There was a fair share of mental health issues, and many of the families of the children in my school were headed by single mothers. In other words, these children came from poor families and from largely crime-ridden communities. I discovered that many of the children that I had to work with and teach, I'd look around and I'd see these kids doing this. And I found out that they were hungry. They didn't eat. I don't mean they had little to eat. They didn't have nothing to eat. And they came to school exhausted because they were hungry and because they had things to do at home. A lot of them couldn't stay at school all day because they had to go back home and babysit or cook the family meal or take care of some ailing parent or grandparent. And so they didn't understand school as a thing you did all day. They came in to fit the legal requirement, and then they were gone. So we had to set up kitchens in the school where we had to wash kids, clean them up, and feed them. And by the time you did that, the school day was in the middle. A lot of these children were suffering from and this is the richest city in the United States and one of the richest cities in the world. We found out these children were suffering from malnutrition, childhood obesity, and some of them were experiencing early puberty, which has its own challenges. In other words, many of those children that I had to work with had seen more in their lives than I had ever seen and would ever see. So here I am, a playwright, and crazy me, I'm in this school to teach these children, of all things, the works of William Shakespeare, like that was relevant to them. Now, the thing that I had to do with children like that was, of course, you don't tell them that you're teaching them Shakespeare, because once you do that, they're out of there. So I had to sneak Shakespeare on them. I had to sneak it in. First of all, they didn't know that the words they were studying was Hamlet or Romeo and Juliet. I had to trick them, which I can tell you how I did that, but I had to trick them. So, it would take about a couple of days to settle them down because, my class was playtime. My class was the escape route. The teachers were usually, the young teachers came into my classes, so they were scared to death of these kids. And so they were in the corner, doing time, basically doing the clock in the classroom. And I had to come in and tame them down. So, I did that and, began to work with them on these plays that they didn't know was Shakespeare. And we noticed that their classroom behavior improved over time. They were better kids on the playground. Some mental health issues emerged within the guise of the characters they were creating. And we could work through their mental health issues through play acting, so they didn't get hit directly. And other children, which was the best thing, the children themselves helped their peers. So it got to the point where I could sit back and watch kids counseling kids, which is an amazing thing to see. Then I could feed them their morning meal because they trusted me. And then they were eating better, and then they were moving because they were doing their role playing. We did chorus work, we did play fights. I had to teach them, you don't always pull out a gun when you're trying to talk to somebody, or a knife. And they got to see that the theater could make a difference to them, and I was finding my way with them as well. I once had a class up in Harlem. There were some real, I'm going to say this, they were some badasses. They were bad. And you walk into the classroom, which is not a hard thing for a person like me. Most of these kids were bigger than me. They had been through all kinds of stuff. And once the teacher walked out of the classroom, because I was a special person, I had to sit back one day and tell them, you know what, I'm going to get paid at the end of the week, whether you learn or not. And you know something else? I got a degree too, and you don't. So I can sit back here, I'm going to read my book, and I'm going to read the lesson I was going to teach you. And you guys, as long as you don't break any windows, it's cool. But you ain't going to get nothing. I'm here, get something out of me. So the leader of the pack decided, we better do this. And so I think one day out of boredom, which is the only way I can describe it, I think they allowed me to teach them. So I did my thing, I did my little trickery with them, and I told them we're going to do a play about a boy and a girl from different families, and the families are all fighting, and the boy and the girl want to get together, but the families can't, blah, blah, blah. Well, they immediately knew what that was about. So they did their little improvs, and they did their improvs, they did all of this. And then gradually I started slipping text in. I started slipping text. They went, what the hell is this? I said, don't. Just hold on to what you have and then read the text. I don't care if it sounds right or not. Just read it. So they read it. Their eyes popped out. We went back to their own thing. They read it. And then eventually they started getting the text. It started coming in. They started asking about the text. They wanted it. They were talking about the text in the hall corridors. They didn't want me to hear them. But sometimes I would be sneaking up on them because I'm small and I could be in a crowd and I could hear them talking about this play they were doing and trying out the lines, and people were laughing, and then they started listening. And then finally we finished, and I said, well, okay, guys, I'm going to have to really tell you what I've done. I pulled a trick on you. They said, Miss, you can't do that to us. We're kids. I said, I've done it. And you just studied Romeo and Juliet. They went, you lying, you lying. I said, yeah, this is it. And this is Shakespeare. You've done it. So don't let anybody ever tell you for the rest of your life, A, that you haven't studied Shakespeare, and B, that you are not a Shakespearean scholar, because all of you are. You've done it. And then they all looked at me with their mouths open. And then one of them asked me the question I will never forget. One said, Miss, what's the end of Romeo and Juliet? I said, you know what? You guys are the luckiest people in the world, because there are not a lot of people I know who don't know the end of Romeo and Juliet. But the only way you're going to find out is you're going to have to go to the library and you're going to have to read the play and then come back and tell me. And they did. They went, they got through that play, and they did it. And some of them went on to university, I discovered, to study English and to become teachers. And I don't know what the other ones did, but at any rate, that's what culture in this school did. But this is the problem. We didn't know how to measure it. We didn't have any measure for this kind of thing. We didn't know that this was going to affect their well-being. We didn't know that this was going to make them calmer. We didn't know that this was going to make them be able to stop bullying in the school, on the playground. We didn't know that this made them better at home. We didn't have any way to measure that because we didn't know it was going to happen. So we couldn't present it as a bunch of statistics to the statisticians, the people who need to measure things, who need to give you the money because they need to see how many people did you redeem or whatever. We couldn't come up with that. So when I came to London a few years later, and I did the same thing in Lambeth and Brent, the teachers once again saw the difference in the children. And I came in as a playwright. I didn't come as a teacher. I didn't have any training. But they saw the difference on their children, but they couldn't measure it. And I suggested, a crude thing about like having two groups, one studying Shakespeare and one not, and compare. But what we need is a school system that isn't so much concerned with whether a child knows the date of the Battle of Waterloo, which I'm not knocking, by the way, you should know. But we need to see school as one of the arenas in which culture and health can come together and put a human being on the best path for lifelong good health. Now, I'm going to pitch my 2 cents in for this week, because this week sounds fantastic. But if I was here the whole time, this is one of the things that I would like to do where I think culture and health can come together. I'm interested in memory houses because my mother has dementia. She has Alzheimer's dementia. And I know that there are care homes for people suffering from dementia and Alzheimer's dementia, which recreate the era in which the patient lived as a young person. So there's one in Bristol called the Grove Care Homes, and they have a 1950 street that features an old-fashioned post office, greengrocers, phone box, a pub, ration books, and old tobacco tins, newspapers and magazines from the period. And they all detail the Queen's coronation. They have a greengrocer with original weighing scales. They have a window where you can choose fresh handmade cakes. They have a pub where the patients can sit and have tea or coffee and a pint of beer. And some of the residents can walk out to this place called Memory Lane, which is where this is located, and many of them had not been out for a year. And they found out that Memory Lane and all the memory lanes cut down on the need for medication. Some of the residents you won't even know, and you wouldn't even know were ill. This is culture. This is culture. This is where culture and health can meet. This is where the generations can also meet as well. And not only just to create an environment, but also to create a situation in which young people can encounter the next generation and can work with the next generation. I sit on the advisory council and the cultural committee for the World War I commemoration that will stretch from next year to 2018, 2019. And what I'd like to see are memory houses as intergenerational centers of culture and encounter. I like to see a memory house in which young people can be part of the environment and where they can get paid. I don't want to see any more young people not getting paid, but where they can be paid and where they can receive the memories and stories of some of the patients, stories that these patients' parents and grandparents told them about World War I, and in which cultural institutions can come together to create this environment and also employ artists, culture makers, and the young, and help the young to recreate and communicate to their own generation this life-changing, epoch-making war. And another thing I'd like to see, and I think we can do it, and I think we are doing it, for the future, that cultural institutions become places of respite, refreshment, participation, and enjoyment for young people who are caring for those ill at home. That these places become, that cultural institutions also can demonstrate that they can become these kind of places where young carers can tell their stories and where there can be. At the end of the day, it is we who must show policymakers, practitioners, the public in general, that culture is not just a pastime. It is we who must develop the language that makes the case for culture in relation to well-being. It is we who must make the measure so that this ephemeral thing called art, called culture, can be measured and shown to the people, shown to the taxpayer that it's worthwhile, that it's important. We are at that moment in history, in what I call the Wizard of Oz moment. And you know, where the wizard, they finally meet the wizard and they say that they haven't got the stuff that they want. And the wizard says, yeah, you do. You just don't have a diploma or a citation. We have to teach politicians and policymakers how to look at us, how to look at our work, how to understand what we do, how to engage with us. It's down to us to do it. We can. We are doing it. Policymakers, health officials, practitioners, and artists themselves, all of us can come together and create a higher intelligence and a greater ability to create, monitor, foster, even predict well-being and good health. We can do it. We can become receptors of big data if we can come up with the system in which we can explain how we can capture big data and predict. We can predict epidemics. We can predict the health of a community. Just as the ancient Greeks understood that drama could, through catharsis, release emotions through the engagement with a play, art and culture can actually cleanse the observer, make her better able to go into the world and not only confront the difficulties of modern life, but in fact, heal the body. We know that culture is not something that is wasting time. It is us. The thing that has come from us. Culture is what we do to make sense of the world, of ourselves. It is what we use to heal ourselves. It is what we use to stay well. And all of you who make culture, who work in health and youth culture and who meld culture, we're going to be the ones in the forefront of keeping an aging society and a young society well and sane. So I want to go back in conclusion to the story I began. I realized that I was in some deep trouble inside myself. So I went home to see my mother. And my mother was asleep in front of the TV because she had these 7 kids, and they ran her ragged, and a husband who worked at night, and my mother was up from 5 in the morning till 2 in the next morning, and she was asleep. So I let myself in, and my mother was asleep in front of the TV. And on the TV was the 1948 classic film of Hamlet. And there was Laurence Olivier leaning over the parapet, staring in the water. And just as I walked in the room, he was saying, "Death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns." And it was at that moment that I understood that it was this play, it was Shakespeare, it was art that was able to give me the expression, the words that I couldn't find to express what I was feeling. It stopped me from going off the edge, and I decided to dedicate my life to using culture as a way to not only heal people's minds, but to heal their bodies as well. That's what we're going to do this week. That's what we're going to find this week. And I want to thank you for letting me tell you this story about how Shakespeare saved my life. Thank you very much.
We're just going to, if we take our seats, and then we'll just, Liz and Bonnie and I will sit and then do come up with some questions. But on behalf of everybody, I'd like to thank Bonnie for that inspiring and personal and kind of informed lecture. It was great. She said it wasn't going to be a lecture, but I thought it was pretty impressive. So thanks very much, Bonnie.
We've got a question immediately. Justin, I can see, can you just raise your hand again so that Neil can just come to you with the roving mic? Thank you. That's great. And,
Hi, thank you for that, Bonnie. I'm Dr. Justin Varney. I'm a consultant in public health medicine. I just wondered what your reflections were on children today grow up in a technological age, and I have a 3-year-old nephew who can use an iPad more sophisticatedly than I can, and they process information differently. And much of what you talked about is the personal interaction that art and culture gives, and particularly through plays. But actually, technology puts us one step removed. And I just wondered how you felt that would change some of the thinking of the discourse around health and culture, when for many people their culture is accessed through a computer or a screen, not through a lived experience in the same way.
Well, I think we, I know a 1-year-old who's showing me how to do an iPad, and of course that means we're in a revolution. We haven't got the tools yet to be able to gauge how that human being is perceiving the world right now. I think there will always be a place for live performance, live engagement, because we actually, as you know, as a doctor, we actually need the one-on-one. The body needs the one-on-one. And I think in a way, we're going to have to actually be more fierce about that. I think what's going to happen maybe in the next 10 years, and as generations do, they're going to actually they're going to be in technology, but they're going to turn around as well and look for the live. And I'm going to give you an example. I walked past one of my friends has a son who collects vinyl records and is like, into the stuff that I thought I couldn't believe. He's not even into iPads. He doesn't want iPods. He doesn't want any of that stuff. He wants the real thing. So we're in the middle of a kind of conjunction. And I think one thing that culture can do is to use technology to create new forms to enable people to engage one-on-one. Crime, and we're losing empathy. We're losing empathy as human beings. We're losing the ability to look one another in the eye, to talk to one another, to listen to one another, to engage with one another. And it's affecting our health. It's affecting our mental health, and it's affecting our physical health. So one of the things that culture can do is stand in the juncture of this revolution and create forms and new engagements and new links by which these two, the live and the technological, can come together, which I don't see to be any different, because the new technology is going to create human beings who are going to do things. I mean, robots are going to do things. So I think the first thing that we make a case for is the importance of that fact that our children are losing empathy. We as a species in the West are losing empathy. I think young people are trying to find it. I think a lot of the things that are happening in Turkey and on the streets are young people saying, we're using Twitter, we're using Tumblr, blah, 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 but we really want to stand up now with bodies and do something. And that's culture. That's where culture happens. That's where it is. So it's a strange time. I think that we need to start thinking about seeing the new technology as an aid to enable empathy to be created. That's our first thing.
Hi, I'm Michelle Baharia.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi, and I'm the CEO of Cool Town Arts. It's a mixed thing, really, because obviously Stalin and Hitler knew a lot about art and used art very effectively, and as in particular visual arts, and actually most regimes do. Most governments use visual arts very effectively. Mm-hmm. And my question really is around who has the power, who owns the culture, and especially if you're talking about capitalist or rich people dominating the culture, but equally in terms of how that got challenged, because you look at Goya as one of the first people to challenge that regime. Art has, or visual arts has, for a long time sat in the hands of the powerful.
Mm-hmm. In fact, we don't even know, most of the art that we know is because it was made for people. It's an interesting thing, because like I said, I just finished with the British Museum, and we're passionate about keeping the museum free at the point of entry. It's very hard to do, because it takes about 56 million quid to run it. So it's, to keep it free. But yet at the same time, entrepreneurs, and I'm calling them that, are coming in, making their own little tours, do their own little things, and they charge people. I mean, I found out that the Bowie exhibition's got like tons of counterfeit tickets out there. The V&A's got to figure out how, they got to figure out how to process what's going in there. So we are at a juncture where people are taking, you could say liberties, but they're also taking the freedom to create their own artistic environment. I mean, sitting on this committee of World War I, I tell these old generals, you can't tell people what to do anymore. You can't tell them what to think. You can't tell them what to feel. But we always, as human beings, are going to go toward what makes us happy and what makes us well. So art has to begin, I think, to recognize that. And not begin to recognize it, but to join in with the recognition of it in a very, in a way in which is recognizable, which is recognizable in competition with all the other things that are out there, like entertainment, which is different from culture, different from art. So it's a difficult question to answer, but who owns it? Technically, in the United Kingdom, we own it, technically.
I'd like to just add something in there. I was struck while Bonnie was talking. She referred to the Marmot report, which many people in this room will be familiar with. And she touched on Marmot's mention of the capabilities, the idea of capabilities. And I was thinking, again, some of you will be familiar, Amartya Sen, Martin Nussbaum, thinking about human capabilities and the role of culture in that. And it struck me, while Bonnie was talking and thinking, about the work of so many people in this room, about the aspect of what kind of society do we want, and the kind of debate around social justice, around equality, books like The Spirit Level, which show the incredible disjuncture inequality in the UK. When you were speaking, Bonnie, about data and how important it is, again, there are so many people in this room who are very preoccupied with showing the outcomes of arts and culture in relation to the work we do. And for me, that mention of the capabilities approach and the kind of work that economists like Sen and Nussbaum have done in thinking about human capability, that for me is a kind of another way of how we work in a very interdisciplinary way and take that aspect of social justice into the kind of work and promotion that we're talking.
We may be forced to define to measure human capability. That may be one of the things that those of us in culture may be required to do. And in a very tangible way. I don't know how you begin to do that, but there's going to be more and more of a need to make that case as funding goes down. But I'm optimistic because, in a way, I feel like, in a strange way, we're back in a time where there's so much independence now with people who are making things, people who want to make art, people who are working with people, health practitioners. There's a lot of independence. Technology is making that independence, but there's a lot of independence-mindedness going on where people are breaking out and doing what they need to do, doing what they want to do in order to create these new forms. I think what we have to do, again, as I said in this talk, is we have to make language, and it's all just, I don't want to use the word but it's all just, we have to make language in order to be able to speak to those people who will have to engage with us so that we can justify what we do, because it's all going to be about justification. And that's one of the things as well.
And I was thinking, Damien, about the work that LUF has done in terms of collating research and sharing outcomes. And I'm wondering if anybody else in the audience wanted to talk a little bit about the incredible work that is going on about how you showcase, how you make the case for culture, the kind of research there is, because this is something that within the arts and cultural sectors we've been thinking about, a great deal, or if there are other areas that people are wanting to pick up on. There's a lady at the back just there who'd like to.
Hi, I'm Annie Sheen. I work for Trinity Lab and Conservatoire of Music and Dance. I'm currently I'm doing an action research project around cultural leadership at the moment for Extend, the Engage in Visual Arts. And I was just wondering what the panel thought about in terms of leadership styles or skills that we now need to engage with the politicians like Bonnie was talking about. What is it that we need to do in terms of individual leadership as a group, as a nation, all sitting here together? What is it? How do we reach those people? Thanks.
Great question.
Well, I think there's two things really. One is the point that Bonnie's made about speaking the language that reaches people and that people are used to hearing. But I think the other thing is about the thing that is unique about the arts, and some of that came across very clearly in Bonnie's talk, which is about stories and the things that really reach people, the things that affected me about the story that Bonnie told was the storytelling, was the kind of fact that there are amazing stories, and artists are, the one thing that they can do well is tell stories. And I think that's something that will always be powerful and people will always crave. And I think sometimes, I think you're right that we do need to speak the language that people need and use the terminology that people want to kind of hear. But I think there's also that thing that can be ever so easy to forget what we do that nobody else does, which is kind of effectively tell spellbinding, magical stories in interesting and engaging ways that actually speak to the whole human experience. Because I think that's the other thing. You talked a bit about the kind of slightly narrow social pool from which our political class is kind of drawn, and I think that one of the things that the arts does is tell the stories of all the people, and I think actually that's something that the arts does better and better. I think so I think there's that as well. There's something about representing all of the kind of wide range of voices that there are in contemporary society that you don't always hear from other kind of quarters.
I think the thing that's really exciting about the UK, and the reason I love this country, is you guys are rebels. And you know, it may not look like it or feel like it sometimes, but there's a real strong localism in terms of people still wanting to make their own work, do their own work, in their own words, in their own way. People are proud of the national institutions, they support them, but it's on the local level, and when I say localism, I mean not only a town or a neighborhood, in people in themselves. This is a very artistic culture. And I don't mean it with a big A, but with a small a. People make culture very easily here and are open to it and know how to do it and naturally feel the links between culture and well-being. And I think if I was starting out now as a young person, I would learn how to articulate that in policy. I'd learn a lot about policy and how to define the things that I know and feel and see in policy terms, because a lot of what's going to be reading grants and making things are not going to be human beings, they're going to be data banks, computers. So we need to learn about stories, as Damien says, but also how to use story as a way to tell, to shape a picture of the way a community is functioning as a political entity and also as a health entity. And we need to find ways of making that language. You have to be one step ahead. Because these guys who make policy, they're not the sharpest tacks in the... They're just people who've got along. They've got there. But we can make policy, and we mustn't be put off by, and I know we're not, but we mustn't be put off by people trying to put us in the back of the bus or calling us all kinds of names or saying we don't rate. Culture at the end of the day, and we know this, is what saves people's lives, is what holds a community together. And we must continue what we're doing, which is find the language to keep saying that over and over and over and over and over.
And I think I would just add to your question about leadership that at a time of great political challenge and economic austerity, it's incredibly important across the arts we show solidarity with each other. So it's fantastic that you come from a dance context, that Bonnie is speaking to us from a theatre, literature context. You know, when we were thinking about hosting this within an art gallery, it's about the solidarity we have as practitioners, about the role of culture, and not being split and fragmented at a time of great economic challenge. You know, really making a case for culture across disciplines as a cultural sector. So I think that's kind of really important. There is a crucial place for the local theatre company in rural Cumbria, as there is for the kind of events and, you know, size of venues there are in London. So for us not to be split by that.
And can I say also quickly, and this is and again, I mean, this is not natural language to me. I had to learn how to talk like this, but we have to learn to make a case for cultural GDP. We have to look at our institutions and our practice and our work and say to these policymakers, if we weren't here, what would this community look like? What would it feel like? How much money would be lost? How many jobs would be lost? What's the housing? We have to make those kind of graphs. That's what I mean by language. And I use an example of the British Museum because that's the institution I know. I know for a fact that there are hotels all over London that rely on people coming to the British Museum. They actually do packages for that. There are local restaurants, shops, and these are kinds of things I think as culture makers, we need to know this kind of information.
And just last week there was published the UK map of, or England and Wales map of health inequalities and areas where life expectancy and all of that data. And if you overlaid that map, just last year the Arts Council produced their list of, they call them cold spots, which is a horrible phrase, but of areas where the people are least engaged with the arts. And it's the same map. It's exactly the same map. And I think it's about articulating that. Sorry, there's a lady here and then...
Hello, Bonnie. My name is Christina.
Hi, Christina.
And while you were talking, I thought to myself, I envisaged people taking over ex-Woolworths and Last Chops and making plays and using the walls for art and use this as cultural centres and community centres. And I think that's the way to go.
I think so too, but I agree with you, Christina. I get frustrated because I see a lot of byproduct that we create as cultural practitioners, as artists. Whenever you get a grant and you do something and you complete the grant and you delivered, sometimes you find out that other things have happened as a result of you doing the project. All of a sudden, maybe some people have decided they're going to do their own thing. They're going to replicate what you've done, and they're going to come together. And you find out within this group that comes together, maybe there are groups of people who've never spoken to one another before, never touched one another before. And we never document those, we seldom document those byproducts that come out. We don't look at the things that come out of a project that we've got a grant for. And I think we need to start doing that. We need to start looking at what happens when a project ends. What do people do with it? It doesn't just end. People often carry on. We can also look at, if we are health practitioners, what's the state of play there when people come into a project? What is it like after the project? We can document that. These are things that we can present, I think, to policymakers, to politicians, as the case for culture. And we all have anecdotes about this. We all have stories about this, things we've done, and it's changed this and it's made that happen. I think we need to write it down. I think we need to write it down and put it as a case for what we do, and to be alert as well to not only do the project or make the artwork, but look at how it's reverberating out within the environment that you are doing the work in, and seeing if it's having an impact and writing it down. Write it down so that when you go back in for that next grant or whatever, you can say, oh, by the way, these people weren't directly involved with what I was doing, but they picked up on some aspect of it I found out, and this is what's happened. So this is the result of what we did when we were there. And we often don't do that because, especially if you're an artist, you go in, you do your dance piece, you get your audience, all of that's there and it's wonderful, and we don't look and see what's happened after we've been there. And I think that's the kind of thing that we should, I know some of you are doing it, but maybe we should begin to do more. I think in the discovery of that, you'll find some incredibly powerful arguments for culture and for the arts. And sometimes it takes a long time to get that kind of data, but I think we need to start to collate that kind of information because it's there.
Hello, sorry, I've lost my voice. So hopefully you can hear me. It's Beth Elliott of the Bethlehem Gallery. We're based in a psychiatric hospital. Don't worry, it's going to continue. I'm based in a psychiatric hospital down in Kent. And I would like the panel's views on how you make a case for the arts in the financial crisis that we're in. And I realise that for many years, when a country is prosperous and for a long time we've had a great injection of money into the healthcare, into the arts. But these days, many of our patients and former patients are looking at losing their homes, their benefits, not just their art centres. And when people are faced with that level of crisis and financial crisis, how do you make a case for the arts when people are potentially losing the food off their plates as well?
Okay.
I'm happy to go in.
We've all got things to say.
Yeah, we do.
Well, there's that Churchill quote, isn't it, about kind of, why keep... I can't quite call it to mind, but he basically said, if you don't keep that kind of cultural side of life alive, then what's the point? And I think there is something about kind of saying that there is our society kind of will this difficult economic time will pass, and that there needs to be some sense of what we are kind of bequeathed to our own future. And I think I started working in the arts in the time of a recession, just kind of coming out of that, and when the money spent on the arts had gradually kind of been frozen and dwindled for years and years and years. And you're right that there has been kind of a good time for the arts over the last kind of 10 years. But for the first 10 years that I worked in the arts, there was very little money, and it was incredibly hard. And culturally, we were starved, I think, as a nation. And I think we do need to kind of think about our responsibilities for future generations. And Bonnie talked about this, about kind of young people not having work. And I think it's a real issue in the arts about what we can provide for this kind of current generation of young people who are leaving school now. And I think there is a real obligation on us to keep these institutions and kind of cultural trends sort of alive, so that there's a kind of future for people that isn't just about brutal economics. But
maybe we need to go back to what the ancient Greeks understood about culture and art. It wasn't just decoration. It wasn't just a way to pass time. It was a way in which human beings were able to understand the environment they were in and understand each other. But not only that, it kept them well. And I think one of the things we can do as cultural practitioners, who engage with culture and health, is maybe we're the people who have to use the word well-being. Maybe we're the people who have to define well-being and not be afraid to do it, not be ashamed to do it, not be embarrassed to do it. Because in the end, well-being is what we're all striving for. Well-being is what's going to cut those bills down. Well-being is what's going to allow people to go forward. So that culture becomes a way in which people can make and keep themselves well. And I think sometimes we're a little embarrassed about talking. We're certainly embarrassed about talking about being ill, and we're certainly embarrassed about talking about being well. And not in some kind of American, jump up and down, punch in the air type thing. It's about being able to see the possibilities for yourself as a human being. And that's going to be the biggest challenge that we're going to be facing in these times of austerity. And culture can do that. So that when you use a book or a computer or a dance piece or a piece of music for itself, yes, but also as a conduit for well-being in the individual, which spreads out well-being in the community and in the nation. If we can become a nation of people who are living in well-being, we become all the things that these policymakers and politicians want.
I think for me to add to that, yes, we're living in a kind of global neoliberal context, and we need to understand that's not just affecting the arts, that's affecting all sorts of ways that an economic solution is absolutely not working. But I suppose for me it's also coming back to thinking a little bit of, within this audience, actually we've got a really broad spectrum of people who were interested enough in the week, in all the events that are taking part in this, looking over the audience, there's such a wide range of people who are activists, who are professionals, who are participants. For me, that's fantastically engaging and exciting. And I think that, whether you see Margaret Hodge, who's challenging Starbucks to pay their taxis, or Stella Creasy, who's after Wonga because they're ripping everybody off, there is a lot of actual political effort to achieve a more equal society. And I think we're part of that. And I think, whether we do that by a partnership with a mental health trust, or whether we do that by sharing resources, or, I think there's so many ways to think about it. But I absolutely agree with Damien and Bonnie. We're at a particular political and historical moment. There are ways forward, and I think it's really, really important that, these kind of events are part of that sense of a positive, creative and also critical way of thinking about what's next.
In fact, the fact that all of you are here, you've already won this. See, that's the most important thing to understand. You already get the juncture of these two. You already know this. You're already within yourselves the mechanisms to deliver what you want. You already do. It's now time to come up with the language and the shapes that can show it to other people. But you've already done this. All of you are on the edge of what is really happening right now. The other people, the people who are not involved that are back with the equivalent of the 19th century. You're already there. It's not about getting there. You're already there. And now we just need to find the language to articulate it.
Time for... There's two hands up, so we'll try and quickly do both.
You'd have to help me with this because it's not completely formed as a question. It was so interesting what you're saying about culture and the need to quote Chomsky, speak truth to power, etc. But as somebody who was here in the 80s as well, and I'm trying to speak for the counterculture as well because the example that comes to mind is the non-stop picket outside the South African embassy, which was reviled by a lot of, the mainstream. And in there, it was all about, ending apartheid. But there was so much art, particularly music and street art and that. And it exists still with the different protest groups that are, at, just as was saying, this point of history where people are being silenced. And I don't quite know what my question is. I'm really happy to be here tonight, but the question is something like, because we're working sort of within a kind of mainstream framework and about funding, etc., this is what we have to work with, and it may take a long time to get them to listen or for us to tell the stories in the way that will make them listen. But is there, for want of a better word, a case for trying to embrace the countercultural elements that, are sometimes less compromised in speaking the truth?
Yes. well, I was back there then too, and that it's maybe a terrible thing to say, but that's always about the edge. It has to get to the wall, and then people start to, because the 80s wiped out all of that because people got comfortable and started making money. So you're talking about an edge, a wall, a feeling. But I think we're there. We're getting so much information, as you say, so much competition that just to keep your head from going like this all the time. But we're absolutely there. We're at the same moment. We just need to we do recognize it. All of you here recognize it. We are at that moment. The question is, how do you get the voice of this moment out there? Because there are people who are ready to receive it. I know this is true. But it's the way to shape the dialogue, shape the words. It's not to remake ourselves, but it's to shape the dialogue and shape the words. But we're absolutely at the same place. I agree with you.
And I think one of the other things is that what the arts do is they act as countercultural within other cultures. So working in the NHS, what the arts bring to the NHS is a sense of challenge and is a sense of kind of demanding kind of questions, asking questions of the orthodoxies that become entrenched in systems like the NHS. And so I think the arts almost perform that countercultural role amid other cultures as well. Just squeeze in that last question. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to add something positive as well. I work within the NHS. I'm an architect for a firm called PNHS that does a lot of mental health projects. And one of the things that I'm really relieved to see is that we're getting the service users involved now, because there's so much more representation coming through to the boards of governors, through the foundation trust. We're actually getting a real pressure from people that use the service to value them. And we had a discussion only last week about how do we know we're valued, and it was through things like seeing money spent on our surroundings. And so the trust governors, the board of directors are getting that message directly now because there's a channel, and that's really positive, I think, and we need to build on it.
And I love the word pressure, because it is the people are bringing in a pressure because of new technology, because of their new access to services, because of people living longer, because of all kinds of new families. The pressure is coming in, and to make what we do in a new way, to talk about what we do in a new way. And we absolutely have the capability to do it. We absolutely have it. And so it's about coming together as we're coming together this week in the spirit of saying that we do have it. How do we now find the way to make the language, to make the shapes, to make the small little interventions? Because I think in the 21st century, it's about intervention. It's about disruption. It's about disruption of the sort of flow that people are living on because of the pressures they're under. And that's what culture does. It's a beautiful, pleasant, necessary disruption. As we see it that way, we can make the things that will help us to maintain the well-being that we have and to have it for the future coming forward.
Wow, what a great way to lead to a chance for us to catch up together. We've got time for refreshments outside, and I think kind of being really stimulated by that idea of creative disruption. A big thank you to Bonnie.
Thank you.